Have you ever imagined donating a part of your body to someone you love, only to be betrayed in the most unthinkable way? As I lay on the operating table at Presbyterian Hospital in Manhattan, the cold, fluorescent lights blurring above me, that question never crossed my mind. All I could think about was saving the man I loved, my husband of 3 years, Marcus Chen. The anesthesia mask descended over my face, and my last conscious thought was of our future together once he was healthy again. I am Elena Rodriguez, and this is the story of how I lost everything and found myself again. 3 months before that fateful surgery, I was sitting in Marcus's hospital room, watching him deteriorate day by day. His kidneys were failing end-stage renal disease, the doctors called it. The love of my life, the successful tech entrepreneur who had swept me off my feet at a charity gala 4 years ago, was now a shadow of himself. Elena, mi amor. He whispered, his voice barely audible. His once strong hands, which used to hold mine with such confidence during our walks through Central Park, now felt like paper in my grip. I'm scared. I had never seen him cry before. Marcus Chen, half Chinese, half American, who had built his software company from nothing, was always the picture of strength and composure. But there, in that sterile room overlooking the East River, tears streamed down his gaunt cheeks. The doctors say dialysis isn't enough anymore. He continued, his breathing labored. They say I need a transplant, but the waiting list... Elena, I don't have that kind of time. I felt my heart physically ache, not metaphorically, but actually ache as if someone was squeezing it in their fist. The pain was so intense, I couldn't breathe properly. It felt like a part of my body was being torn away, just watching him suffer. What about a living donor? I asked Dr. Sarah Mitchell, our nephrologist, the next day. I've read about it. Family members can donate. Dr. Mitchell adjusted her glasses and looked at me with the kind of careful expression doctors use when they're about to change someone's life forever. It's possible, Elena. We'd need to run compatibility tests, but living donor transplants have much better success rates than deceased donor organs. Then test me, I said without hesitation. Test me right now. Marcus grabbed my hand so tightly I thought he might break my fingers. Elena, no, I can't ask you to do that. It's major surgery. You'd be risking your life for me. I looked into his dark eyes that had looked at me with such love when he proposed 2 years ago at the top of the Empire State Building, eyes that had cried happy tears when we got married in a small ceremony in my parents' garden in Queens. Those same eyes were now filled with desperate hope and crushing guilt. Marcus, I said, placing my other hand on his cheek, feeling the roughness of his unshaven skin. When I married you, I promised in sickness and in health. This is what that means. This is love, not just words, but action. The compatibility test results came back a week later, perfect match. Dr. Mitchell called it remarkably compatible, explaining that the chances were less than 1 in 4, even for married couples. It's like you were made for each other, she said with a smile. If only I had known how prophetic and tragic those words would become. The surgery was scheduled for October 15th, 2024. In the weeks leading up to it, Marcus seemed to transform back into his old self, energetic, loving, full of plans for our future. Elena, after this is over, we're going to travel, he said one evening as we sat in our Upper East Side condo. The apartment, a 2-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the Chrysler Building, had been our pride and joy. We'd saved for 3 years to afford the down payment, me working as a financial analyst at Goldman Sachs, him grinding 80-hour weeks building his startup. Where do you want to go first? I asked, curled up next to him on our white sectional sofa, the one we'd picked out together at ABC Carpet and Home. Italy, he said immediately. Tuscany. You've always wanted to see the vineyards. He pulled me closer, and I could smell his cologne, Tom Ford Oud Wood, the one I'd bought him for our first anniversary. And then, maybe Japan, to see where my mother grew up. I want to show you Mount Fuji. I smiled, resting my head on his shoulder. This was the Marcus I had fallen in love with the dreamer, the planner, the man who could see beauty in everything. But first, he said, his tone becoming more serious, "We need to take care of some paperwork." I lifted my head to look at him. "What kind of paperwork?" "The hospital requires a bunch of forms for the surgery," he explained, getting up to retrieve a stack of documents from his desk. "Insurance stuff, consent forms, financial authorizations, and I also want to make sure our investments are properly structured while I'm recovering." The papers felt thick in my hands, at least 20 pages of dense legal text. I flipped through them, seeing headings like medical power of attorney, financial authorization, and investment partnership agreement. "Marcus, this looks complicated. Maybe we should have a lawyer review." "Elena, trust me," he interrupted, sitting back down and taking my hands. "I've been in business for years. I know what these documents are. The hospital won't do the surgery without them, and the investment opportunity I've been working on requires these signatures to move forward." He looked into my eyes with such sincerity, such love. "This company, SR Biotech, they're developing revolutionary medical devices. If we invest now before my recovery, we could double our money within a year. It would secure our future." I felt a small flutter of unease in my stomach, like when you're in an elevator that drops too quickly. Something felt rushed, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Marcus had always been the financially savvy one in our relationship. When we'd bought the condo, he'd handled all the paperwork while I focused on my job. "I trust you," I said, finally picking up the pen. "But can you just explain what SR Biotech does exactly?" "They're developing next-generation biomedical technology," he said, flipping to a page with corporate letterhead. "Specialized equipment for organ transplants, artificial organs, that kind of thing. Serendipity Rose, the CEO, is brilliant. I've been in talks with her for months." I signed each page where he indicated trusting the man I loved more than life itself. The irony of that phrase would haunt me later. October 15th dawned gray and drizzly, typical autumn weather in New York. I woke up early at 4:30 a.m., my stomach twisted with nervous energy. Marcus was already awake, staring at the ceiling. "Second thoughts?" I asked, running my fingers through his hair. "About accepting your kidney, never," he said, turning to face me. "But Elena, I need you to know something. If anything happens to you in there, I'll never forgive myself." The physical sensation of fear is difficult to describe unless you've experienced it. It starts as a cold drop in your stomach, then spreads outward like ice water through your veins. Your heart pounds so hard you can feel it in your ears. Your mouth goes dry. Your hands shake. That's what I felt in that moment, but I pushed it down. "Nothing will happen," I said firmly. "Dr. Mitchell said these surgeries are routine now. In 6 months, you'll be back to working 80-hour weeks, and I'll be complaining about never seeing you." We both laughed, but there was an edge to it. At Presbyterian Hospital, the pre-surgery process was a blur of paperwork, IV lines, and medical staff explaining procedures. Marcus was taken to prep first, and I was left alone with my thoughts for 30 minutes. I remember looking out the window at the city below, people rushing to work, yellow cabs, honking, steam rising from manholes. Normal life continuing while I was about to give away a piece of myself. I thought about the future Marcus had painted: Italy, Japan, the success of SR Biotech. I imagined us in 5 years, maybe with children, financially secure, traveling the world. I'm Elena Rodriguez. A nurse appeared with a wheelchair. "It's time." The anesthesia kicked in quickly. My last clear memory was Dr. Mitchell's reassuring smile and Marcus blowing me a kiss from across the hall as they wheeled him to his operating room. I woke up to the sound of machines beeping and the antiseptic smell of recovery. My side felt like someone had driven a knife between my ribs and left it there. But the pain was nothing compared to the joy I felt when the nurse told me the surgery had been a complete success. "Both operations went perfectly," she said, checking my IV. "Your husband's new kidney is functioning beautifully." I spent 2 days in recovery, during which Marcus visited constantly. He brought me flowers, white roses my favorite, and sat by my bed reading aloud from The Sun Also Rises, the book we'd been working through together. Thank you," he said quietly on the second evening, holding my hand as I drifted in and out of consciousness from the pain medication. I love you more than words can express. Those were the last loving words my husband ever spoke to me. I was released on October 18th, but Marcus had to stay 2 more days for observation. On October 20th, I returned to the hospital to bring him home carrying a small bag with fresh clothes and the small music box he'd given me when we first started dating, a delicate porcelain ballerina that played Chopin's Minute Waltz when wound up. I brought your favorite, I said, setting the music box on his bedside table and winding it up. The familiar melody filled the room. Marcus looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, cold, calculating, almost predatory. The man who had held my hand through every moment of this ordeal was gone, replaced by a stranger. Elena, he said, his voice flat and emotionless. We need to talk. He reached into his bedside drawer and pulled out a manila envelope. My name was written on it in his handwriting, but something about his posture made my blood run cold. What is this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Divorce papers. He said, tossing the envelope onto my lap as casually as if he were handing me a magazine. I want you to sign them. The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually felt my knees buckle, and I grabbed the bed rail to keep from falling. The music box continued playing its cheerful melody, now sounding like a funeral dirge. What? I managed to choke out. Marcus, what are you saying? I'm saying this marriage is over, he replied, looking out the window instead of at me. Sign the papers, Elena. Make this easy on both of us. The room started spinning. I felt like I was drowning, like my lungs were filled with water, and I couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. 3 days ago, I had literally given him a piece of my body to save his life. 3 days ago, he was reading me Hemingway and telling me he loved me. But why? I stammered, tears starting to flow down my cheeks. Marcus, I just gave you my kidney. I saved your life. He finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes was worse than anger or hatred. It was complete indifference. And I'll make good use of it, he said calmly. But that doesn't mean I owe you anything else. I felt something inside me shatter, not just my heart, but my entire understanding of who I was, who he was, who we were together. The physical pain was indescribable. It felt like someone had reached into my chest and torn out vital organs, leaving me hollow and bleeding internally. You planned this, I whispered, the realization hitting me like a sledgehammer. You planned this from the beginning. Marcus shrugged, a gesture so casual it was obscene given the circumstances. I needed to survive Elena. You were the means to that end. I collapsed into the chair beside his bed, my legs no longer able to support me. The music box wound down the ballerina, slowing her dance until she stopped mid-spin, frozen in an eternal pirouette. The papers I signed, I said, my voice hollow. Those weren't just for the surgery, were they? You always were smart, he said, with what might have been admiration if it weren't so cruel. Too bad you're all so naive. Just then the door opened and Marcus's mother, Patricia Chen, walked in carrying an enormous fruit basket and wearing an expression of exaggerated concern. Oh my goodness, Elena! She exclaimed, rushing to my side. What's wrong? You look devastated. Patricia Chen, a petite woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes, had never particularly liked me. She'd made it clear from the beginning that she thought Marcus could do better than a simple analyst from Queens. But she'd always been polite civil. Now, seeing the divorce papers scattered on the floor, her mask slipped for just a moment. I caught a flash of satisfaction in her eyes before she composed herself. Marcus, what is this? She demanded, pointing at the papers. What have you done? It's none of your business, Mom, Marcus said, but there was no real irritation in his voice. Of course it's my business. Patricia continued her performance. Elena just saved your life. How could you even think about divorce at a time like this? I watched this charade with growing clarity. Patricia's hand on my shoulder was squeezing just a little too hard. Her voice had a rehearsed quality, like an actress who'd practiced her lines. Mrs. Chen, I said quietly, looking up into her face. You knew, didn't you? You knew this was going to happen. Elena, sweetheart, what are you talking about? She replied, but her grip on my shoulder tightened. I'm as shocked as you are. I stood up slowly, my surgical sight screaming in protest. No, you're not. You're not shocked at all. Patricia's mask finally dropped completely. Elena, dear, maybe you should go home and rest. You've been through a lot. Yes, I said, gathering the divorce papers from the floor. I have been through a lot, but I'm just getting started. I walked to the bedside table and picked up the music box. As I turned to leave, Marcus spoke one last time. Elena, for what it's worth, you did save my life. But now, I want to live it without you. I stopped at the door, not turning around. And I want to live mine without you too, Marcus. You just don't know what that's going to mean yet. I took a taxi back to what I thought was our home, but when I tried to use my keycard to enter our building, it didn't work. The doorman, Jose, looked at me with pity. Miss Elena, I'm sorry, but your access was revoked this morning, he said, avoiding my eyes. There's a lady upstairs now. She said she's the new resident. The new resident. My hands started shaking again, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from rage. Jose, I live here. This is my home. My name is on the deed. Jose looked uncomfortable. Miss, I'm just doing what I was told. Maybe you should talk to building management. I took the elevator to the management office on the 3rd floor, where Mrs. Kim, the building manager, greeted me with the kind of forced smile people use when they're about to deliver bad news. Elena, I was wondering when you'd come by, she said, pulling out a file. I have the paperwork here showing the transfer of ownership. Everything appears to be in order. She handed me a stack of documents. My name appeared nowhere on them. The apartment was now owned by something called SR Holdings LLC, with one Serendipity Rose Fitzgerald listed as the primary contact. Serendipity Rose, SR, the woman Marcus had told me about, the brilliant CEO of SR Biotech. This can't be legal, I said, my voice rising. I never agreed to sell my home. Mrs. Kim looked genuinely sympathetic. Elena, according to these documents, you signed a power of attorney giving your husband full control over your assets. It's all here. She pointed to a signature on one of the documents. It looked like mine because it was mine. I remembered signing it, thinking it was a medical authorization. Where are my things? I asked, feeling numb. Storage unit B7 in the basement, Mrs. Kim said softly. I'm sorry, Elena. I really am. The storage unit contained my entire life, condensed into 5 cardboard boxes. My clothes, my books, my photographs, my grandmother's jewelry, everything that made me who I was, packed away like garage sale items. But the music box wasn't there. I took a taxi to my friend Isabella Santos's apartment in Brooklyn. Isabella and I had been roommates in college and remained close even after I married Marcus. She was a public defender, tough as nails, with short black hair and eyes that missed nothing. Jesus Christ, Elena, she said when she opened the door and saw me standing there with my 5 boxes. What happened? I told her everything, every detail, every betrayal, every moment of my 3-day nightmare. Isabella listened without interruption, her face growing darker with each revelation. That bastard, she said when I finished. That calculating sociopathic bastard. Isabella, I need a lawyer, I said. The best divorce attorney you know. Isabella shook her head. Elena, divorce law isn't going to help you here. This isn't about marital dissolution. This is fraud, grand larceny, maybe even conspiracy. She opened her laptop and started researching. SR Holdings LLC was incorporated on September 12th, 1 month before your surgery. The registered address is a P.O. box in Delaware. This is a shell company, Elena. They created it specifically to steal your assets. Over the next week, I contacted 7 different law firms. They all told me the same thing: the paperwork was legal. I had signed everything voluntarily, and my chances of recovery were essentially zero. Mrs. Chen, the seventh lawyer, said, "I understand your emotional distress, but legally speaking, these transactions were conducted with your explicit consent. The fact that you were deceived about their purpose doesn't invalidate the signatures." I left his office feeling more hopeless than ever. I had lost my husband, my home, my savings, and my future. All I had left was my job at Goldman Sachs and the growing rage that kept me awake at night. That rage was about to become my most powerful weapon. Isabella found him on the 4th page of Google's search results, Jonathan Sterling, attorney at law. His website was basic, almost amateurish, but the testimonials caught her attention. John Sterling took my case when everyone else said it was hopeless. He doesn't just practice law, he fights for justice. If you've been screwed over by the system, Sterling is your guy. Sterling's office was in a run-down building in Lower Manhattan, the kind of place where the elevator makes concerning noises and the hallways smell like industrial cleaner and broken dreams. His office door had a small hand-lettered sign, J. Sterling, attorney at law, justice for the forgotten. The waiting room was tiny with mismatched furniture and stacks of case files everywhere. A middle-aged woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Patel, his secretary, told me he was running late. "He's in court," she explained. "Pro bono case, single mother fighting a slumlord." When Sterling finally arrived 40 minutes later, he looked exactly like what Central Casting would order for burned-out crusader lawyer. He was in his mid-50s with graying hair that needed cutting and a suit that had seen better decades. But his eyes were sharp and kind, and when he shook my hand, his grip was firm. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said, leading me into his office. "Tell me everything." His office was a disaster of legal briefs, law books, and what appeared to be evidence from dozens of cases. On one wall was a collection of newspaper clippings, not victories, but cases he'd lost fighting for underdogs against corporations and wealthy defendants. I told him my story from the beginning, starting with Marcus's illness and ending with my current situation. Sterling took notes in a battered legal pad, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Show me the documents you signed," he said when I finished. I pulled out photocopies of everything I could remember. Sterling studied them with the intensity of a detective examining crime scene evidence. "SR Biotech," he murmured. "And SR Holdings. Both companies incorporated within weeks of each other." He looked up at me. "Ms. Rodriguez, did your husband ever mention the name Serendipity Rose before he got sick?" I thought carefully. "No, never. He said he'd been talking to her for months about the investment opportunity, but I'd never heard her name before the surgery." Sterling turned to his computer and started typing. "Serendipity Rose Fitzgerald, age 28, graduated from Columbia Business School 2 years ago. Before that, she worked as interesting." "What?" "She worked as a pharmaceutical sales rep. Her territory included Presbyterian Hospital." Sterling's fingers flew across the keyboard. "And according to LinkedIn, she started dating someone named Marcus Chen about 6 months ago." The room started spinning again. 6 months ago. Marcus had been diagnosed 8 months ago. He'd been planning this betrayal while I was researching kidney donations and preparing to save his life. There's more," Sterling continued. "SR Holdings has been moving money around, large transfers to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Your money, Ms. Rodriguez, is being laundered." I felt the familiar sensation of drowning, but this time it was mixed with something else, hope. "Can we stop them?" I asked. Sterling leaned back in his chair. "Elena, may I call you Elena? What they've done to you is monstrous. It's also very, very illegal. But proving it is going to be difficult and dangerous." "Dangerous how?" "People who orchestrate this level of financial fraud don't usually stop at paperwork. If they're willing to exploit your medical crisis to steal your life savings, they might be willing to do other things to protect themselves." Sterling opened a desk drawer and pulled out a small digital recorder no bigger than a matchbook. "I'm going to ask you to do something that could put you at risk," he said. "But it might be our only chance to get them." The plan was simple, in concept terrifying in execution. I would contact Patricia Chen and arrange to meet her pretending to be broken and desperate. Sterling believed that Patricia was the weak link that, given the opportunity, she would gloat about how cleverly they had manipulated me. Narcissists can't help themselves, Sterling explained. They need to feel superior to believe they're smarter than everyone else. If you can make her feel safe and superior, she'll talk. I practiced for 3 days. In Isabella's bathroom mirror, I rehearsed my most pitiful expressions, my most desperate pleas. I had to become the perfect victim, broken, defeated, no threat to anyone. The hardest part was making myself vulnerable to the woman who had helped destroy my life. Patricia Chen had lunch every Thursday at Balthazar in Soho. Isabella had done reconnaissance confirming her routine. At 12:30 p.m. on Thursday, November 7th, I positioned myself at a corner table with a clear view of the entrance. Patricia arrived right on schedule, impeccably dressed in a black Chanel suit and carrying a Hermes bag. She was with 2 other women of similar age and economic status, the kind of ladies who lunch and consider charity work a competitive sport. I waited until her companions left, then approached her table. The digital recorder was hidden in my coat pocket, activated and ready. "Mrs. Chen," I said quietly, hoping I sounded appropriately defeated. Patricia looked up with undisguised annoyance. "Elena, what are you doing here? I needed to see you," I said, allowing my voice to shake. "Please, just 5 minutes." Patricia glanced around the restaurant, clearly embarrassed to be seen with me. I had dressed deliberately poorly, an old coat, no makeup, my hair unwashed. I looked like exactly what I was supposed to be, a woman who had lost everything. 5 minutes, she said coldly. "Then I never want to see you again." I sat down across from her, hunching my shoulders to appear smaller. "Mrs. Chen, I know Marcus doesn't love me anymore. I know the marriage is over. But I'm begging you, please don't let him take everything. I have nothing left." Patricia's expression softened slightly, but not with sympathy. It was the look a cat gives a wounded mouse. "Elena, dear, what did you expect?" she said, her voice taking on a condescending tone. "My son is a brilliant businessman. Did you really think he'd stay married to someone so ordinary?" The word hit like a slap, but I forced myself to crumble visibly. "I know I'm not good enough for him. I always knew that. But Mrs. Chen, I gave him my kidney. Doesn't that count for anything?" Patricia actually laughed, a cold, tinkling sound like ice breaking. "Oh, sweetheart, you still don't understand, do you?" she said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "That kidney wasn't a gift. It was payment." "Payment for what?" "For the privilege of being married to my son for as long as you were useful," Patricia said, clearly enjoying herself now. "Marcus has been planning his exit strategy since the day you met." I let my face go blank with shock, which wasn't difficult since I was actually shocked. Even knowing what I knew, hearing it confirmed so casually was devastating. But he loved me," I whispered. "Marcus loves success, dear. He loves money and power and beautiful things. You were never beautiful enough, never smart enough, never sophisticated enough for a man like my son." Patricia signaled the waiter for another glass of wine. "But you were useful. You had a good job, a decent income, and most importantly, you had compatible organs." The casual cruelty of that statement made my stomach lurch, but I pressed on. "Mrs. Chen, please. I'm not asking for everything back. Just enough to start over. Maybe $50,000 just so I can rent an apartment." "Absolutely not," Patricia said sharply. "Elena, you need to understand something. This isn't personal. It's business. Marcus needed a kidney, and you provided one. Transaction complete." She leaned back in her chair, studying me with the detached interest of an entomologist examining a bug. "Besides," she continued, "SR Holdings needs every penny for the new ventures Marcus and Serendipity are planning. They're going to be very wealthy, Elena. Wealthy enough that your little nest egg won't even register as a rounding error." Serendipity. I repeated, making sure the name was clearly recorded. Beautiful girl, Harvard MBA trust fund, family connections in biotech. Everything Marcus needs in a wife. Patricia smiled with genuine warmth for the first time in our conversation. They're getting married in the spring. Destination wedding in Tuscany. Tuscany. The place Marcus had promised to take me after his recovery. But how? I asked, letting desperation creep into my voice. How did you do it? The legal documents, the companies. Patricia waved her hand dismissively. Oh, that was Serendipity's idea. Shell companies' offshore accounts, legal maneuvering. The girl is brilliant, much too good for someone like you to understand. She finished her wine and gathered her purse. Elena, take my advice. Move on. Find some nice, ordinary man who matches your level. Forget about Marcus, and forget about the money. Consider the kidney your donation to a worthy cause. As she stood to leave, Patricia looked down at me with something approaching pity. You know, in a way, I'm proud of you, she said. It took real sacrifice to give up that kidney. Too bad sacrifice isn't enough to keep a man like my son. She walked away, leaving me sitting alone at the table. I waited 5 minutes to make sure she was really gone, then quietly turned off the recorder. I had it. I had everything Sterling needed. Back in Sterling's office, we listened to the recording 3 times. With each replay, Sterling's smile grew wider. Elena, this is better than I hoped, he said, making notes. She admitted to conspiracy money laundering and fraudulent documentation. Plus, she gave us the girlfriend's name and confirmed the offshore accounts. Is it enough? I asked. It's enough to get them arrested, Sterling said. But we need more to get your money back. Over the next 2 weeks, Sterling worked like a man possessed. He subpoenaed bank records, traced financial transactions, and built a timeline of Marcus and Serendipity's relationship. The picture that emerged was even worse than I had imagined. Marcus had met Serendipity Rose Fitzgerald 8 months before his diagnosis, which meant he had met her before he even knew he was sick. They had started the financial planning, immediately setting up shell companies and preparing for what they called the eventual extraction. But the most damning evidence came from Marcus's medical records. Sterling discovered that Marcus had delayed reporting his symptoms for months, allowing his condition to worsen to the point where he would need a transplant. He had deliberately made himself sicker to ensure he would need my kidney. Elena, Sterling said, showing me the medical timeline, he could have started treatment early and possibly avoided the transplant altogether. He chose to let his kidneys fail because it served his plan. The betrayal was so complete, so calculating, that it transcended personal cruelty and entered the realm of pure evil. There's one more thing, Sterling said quietly. We found a life insurance policy. $2 million with you as the insured and Marcus as the beneficiary. I felt the familiar drowning sensation. What does that mean? It means if you had died during the surgery, Marcus would have collected $2 million on top of keeping all your assets. The room went silent, except for the hum of Sterling's ancient air conditioner. I finally understood the full scope of what had been done to me. Marcus hadn't just been willing to destroy my life, he had been hoping for my death. Sterling. I said, my voice steady for the first time in weeks. I want to destroy them. Elena, we can prosecute them. We can recover your assets, but... No, I interrupted. I want to destroy them the way they destroyed me. I want them to lose everything they love, everything they value, everything they think makes them superior to people like me. Sterling studied my face carefully. What exactly are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to help me give them exactly what they deserve. The plan Sterling devised was elegant in its simplicity. We would force Marcus and Serendipity to incriminate themselves by making them believe they were in danger of losing everything. Sterling filed a comprehensive lawsuit, but we made sure the initial filing was deliberately flawed, full of legal errors that any competent attorney would easily exploit. We wanted them to feel confident to believe they were smarter than us. The bait worked perfectly. Marcus hired the most expensive legal team in New York, led by Amanda Cross, a partner at Whitman Sterling and Associates, who charged $200 per hour and had never lost a case. And Mr. Chen, Cross told Marcus in their initial meeting, which we knew about because Sterling had contacts everywhere in the legal community. This lawsuit is amateur hour. We'll have it dismissed within a month. But while Cross was focused on the obvious legal flaws, Sterling was building a criminal case. He contacted the FBI's white-collar crime division and presented them with Patricia's recorded confession, the financial evidence, and the insurance fraud documentation. Agent Sarah Kim of the FBI Financial Crimes Unit was very interested. "So, Ms. Rodriguez," she told me during our meeting at Federal Plaza, "what your ex-husband and his associates did constitutes mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and insurance fraud. We're looking at potential sentences of 20 to 30 years. When will you arrest them?" I asked. "We need to build an airtight case," Agent Kim replied. "But based on what Mr. Sterling has provided, I'd say we're looking at arrests within 6 to 8 weeks. Sterling had one more card to play. Through his network of contacts, he arranged for Marcus and Serendipity to believe they were being investigated by the IRS for tax evasion related to their offshore accounts. The pressure was designed to make them panic and make mistakes. It worked. Marcus called me on December 3rd, the first time I'd heard his voice since the hospital. "Elena, we need to talk," he said, his voice tight with stress. "I thought we'd said everything we needed to say," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Look, I know you're upset about the divorce, but this lawsuit you filed is ridiculous. You're embarrassing yourself." I let him talk, recording the conversation on Sterling's advice. "The thing is," Marcus continued, "I'm willing to offer you a settlement. Something fair so we can both move on." "What kind of settlement?" $50,000. Cash. You drop the lawsuit, we go our separate ways, everyone's happy. $50,000. Less than 1/10 of what they had stolen from me. "Marcus," I said carefully, "why are you offering me anything? According to you, I signed away all my rights." There was a long pause. "Elena, I'm trying to be generous here. Don't make this more complicated than it needs to be." "Complicated how?" Another pause, longer this time. "You don't want to push this, Elena. You really don't. Some things are better left alone." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. I was supposed to be intimidated to take the money and disappear. "I'll think about it," I said, and hung up. Sterling was delighted when I played him the recording. "He's scared," Sterling said. "They're all scared. Agent Kim told me they've been moving money around, frantically trying to hide assets. It's exactly what we want them to do." 3 days later, Serendipity Rose Fitzgerald made her first mistake. She called me directly. "Elena Rodriguez." The voice was young, confident, with the kind of boarding school accent that money can buy. "Yes, this is Serendipity Fitzgerald. I think we should meet." I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop in Midtown, partly because I was curious, and partly because Sterling thought it might be useful. Serendipity was everything Patricia had said she was: beautiful, poised, expensively dressed. She looked like she'd stepped out of a Ralph Lauren advertisement, but when she sat down across from me, I could see the stress around her eyes. "Elena, I want to start by saying I'm sorry about the way this has all played out," she said, her voice smooth and practiced. Are you sorry about stealing my husband or stealing my money?" I asked. Serendipity didn't flinch. "I'm sorry you're hurt, but Marcus and I, what we have is real. We're in love." "Love," I repeated. "Is that what you call planning financial fraud together?" "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. SR Holdings. SR Biotech. Shell companies set up to launder my assets. Should I go on? Serendipity leaned forward, her composure cracking slightly. "Elena, you need to be very careful about making accusations you can't prove." "Oh, I can prove them," I said calmly. "The question is, what are you willing to do to make this go away? What do you want?" "I want everything back. My money, my apartment, my life. And I want you and Marcus to face the consequences of what you've done." Well, Serendipity's mask finally slipped completely. "You stupid bitch," she hissed. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? My family has connections you can't even imagine. We will bury you." I smiled for the first time in months. "Serendipity, You just made a very big mistake. I pulled out my phone and showed her the recording app, which had been running since she sat down. Thank you for the confession, I said. My lawyer is going to love this. The arrests happened on December 15th, just as Agent Kim had predicted. Marcus was taken into custody at his office at SR Biotech. Serendipity was arrested at her apartment while packing for what appeared to be an extended trip to Switzerland. Patricia was arrested at her weekly bridge game at the Riverside Country Club. The charges were extensive conspiracy to commit fraud mail, fraud wire fraud money, laundering identity theft and insurance fraud. Marcus and Serendipity each faced up to 30 years in federal prison. Patricia faced 15 years as an accessory. The story made the front page of the New York Post. Kidney scam tech CEO stole wife's organ and fortune. I watched the news coverage from Sterling's office, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. Justice was being served, but it couldn't undo what had been done to me. Elena, Sterling said, there's something else. He handed me a document. The FBI has frozen all their assets pending investigation, but they've agreed to immediate restitution for you. You're getting everything back plus damages. The check was for $847,000, my original assets plus interest and punitive damages. What happens now? I asked. Now you get to decide who you want to be next, Sterling replied. 6 months later, I was standing in the office of what would become the Phoenix Foundation for Medical Fraud Victims, located in a bright modern space in Chelsea. The foundation would provide legal assistance and financial support for people who had been victimized by medical-related fraud. Ms. Rodriguez said Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the physician who would serve as our medical director. I think what you're doing here is going to save a lot of lives. Through the window, I could see the city spread out below the same city where I had lost everything and found myself again. My scar from the kidney donation had healed completely, leaving only a thin white line as evidence of what I had been through. Marcus was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. The stress of the trial and conviction had caused his body to reject the transplanted kidney, and he was back on dialysis. Serendipity received 20 years and was currently serving her time at a federal facility in Connecticut. Patricia received 10 years and was appealing her conviction. I felt no satisfaction in their suffering, but I felt peace in knowing they could never hurt anyone else the way they had hurt me. Isabella knocked on my office door. Elena, your 3 o'clock is here. My 3 o'clock was Maria Santos, a woman whose husband had convinced her to donate bone marrow for his rare cancer that turned out to be completely fabricated. He had sold the bone marrow on the black market and disappeared with her life savings. Maria, I said, standing to greet her, thank you for coming in. Let's talk about how we can help. As I listened to Maria tell her story, I realized that my own experience had given me something precious, the ability to recognize that particular kind of pain and the knowledge that it was possible to survive it. 1 year after the arrests, I received an unexpected package. Inside was my music box, the one Marcus had destroyed in our apartment. It had been carefully restored, the ballerina's head reattached, the mechanism repaired. The note inside was from Sterling. Every ballerina deserves to dance again. I wound it up and listened to Chopin's Minute Waltz fill my apartment. A different apartment in a different neighborhood, but truly mine this time. The ballerina spun gracefully, her face serene, her arms extended in eternal grace. I had started with a question. Have you ever imagined donating a part of your body to someone you love, only to be betrayed in the most unthinkable way? Now, I had an answer. Yes, I had lived that nightmare. But I had also learned that betrayal, however devastating, is not the end of the story. It can be the beginning of something stronger, something more authentic, something more truly yours than anything you had before. I closed the music box and put it on my mantelpiece next to a photo of the Phoenix Foundation's first graduating class of victim advocates. In the photo, 12 women and 3 men stood together, all of them survivors of medical fraud, all of them now trained to help others navigate the same dark waters they had survived. We were proof that you can lose everything, your money, your health, your trust, your marriage, even pieces of your body, and still find a way to build something beautiful from the wreckage. The ballerina would dance again, And so would I. If you've been touched by Elena's story, please share it with others who might need to hear it. And if you or someone you know has been a victim of medical or financial fraud, remember you are not alone and your story is not over. There are people who will fight for you, just as Elena learned to fight for herself. What would you have done in Elena's situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below.